Before we begin tonight's journey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's exploring ancient mythology with us from around the world. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let's travel back over 2500 years to ancient Greece, where one god ruled supreme over all others. In the pantheon of Greek mythology, one name towers above all others. Not Poseidon, who commanded the seas, not Hades, who ruled the realm of the dead, but Zeus, king of the gods, master of thunder and lightning, the Sky Father whose very name means bright or sky. When ancient Greeks looked up at storm clouds gathering on the horizon, when they heard thunder crack across mountain peaks, when lightning split the heavens, they knew Zeus was watching. But Zeus wasn't always the supreme ruler of the cosmos. His path to ultimate power was forged through prophecy, violence, cunning, and war. His story begins not with glory but with fear. The fear of a Titan king named Kronos, who knew that children have a way of replacing their parents. The ancient Greeks told this story around fires, in temples, through epic poetry that echoed across centuries. They painted it on pottery, carved it into stone, and wove it into the very fabric of their understanding of the universe. Because Zeus wasn't just a god to them, he was order itself, law, justice, the force that kept the cosmos from sliding back into primordial chaos. So who was Zeus? How did he rise from a hidden infant in a Cretan cave to become the most powerful deity in Greek mythology? What made him different from the Titan rulers who came before? And why, despite his flaws, his infidelities, his moments of rage, did the ancient Greeks continue to worship him as the father of gods and men? Tonight, we're going to explore the complete story of Zeus, from his dramatic birth to his epic wars, from his countless love affairs to his role as cosmic king. We'll discover how he shaped heroes, influenced wars, and left a legacy that still echoes through Western culture today. This isn't just mythology. This is the story of power, family, fate, and what it means to rule. Our story begins in darkness, with a prophecy that would shape the fate of the universe. Kronos, the youngest and most ambitious of the 12 Titans, had overthrown his own father Uranus in a brutal act of violence. With a sickle forged by his mother Gaia, the Earth herself, Kronos had castrated Uranus and seized control of the cosmos. Now, married to his sister Rhea, Kronos ruled during what some called the Golden Age, a time of peace and prosperity. But Kronos couldn't escape the shadow of his past. His mother Gaia and his father Uranus had both warned him. The same fate that befell Uranus would befall him. Just as the son had overthrown the father, so too would Kronos be overthrown by his own child. The prophecy was clear, unavoidable, carved into the fabric of fate itself. One of Kronos' children would rise up and strip him of his power. Terror gripped the Titan king. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, spilled too much divine blood to lose it all to some future child. So Kronos made a decision that would define his reign and seal his doom. He would not give his children the chance to overthrow him. He would not wait for rebellion to fester. He would end the threat before it could begin. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Hestia, Kronos took the infant from her mother's arms and swallowed her whole. The goddess of the hearth, barely born, vanished into her father's gullet, trapped but not dead, suspended in the darkness of Kronos' belly. Rhea was horrified. She pleaded with her husband, begged him to reconsider, but Kronos was resolute. Better this than to lose his throne. Better to imprison his children than to give them the chance to rebel. And so, one by one, as Rhea bore more children, Kronos swallowed them all. Demeter, goddess of harvest and grain, swallowed on the day of her birth. Hera, who had become queen of the gods, consumed before she could take her first breath outside her father's body. Hades, future lord of the underworld, darkness swallowing darkness. Poseidon, who would one day rule the seas, trapped before he ever saw water. 5 children. 5 gods and goddesses imprisoned in their father's belly, aware but helpless, growing but never truly living. Rhea watched in anguish as each birth became another tragedy. She was a mother, but her children were stolen from her before she could even hold them. The grief consumed her. The rage built inside her like magma beneath a dormant volcano. When Rhea became pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she couldn't let it happen again. She couldn't watch another child disappear into Kronos' maw. So she turned to the only beings powerful enough to help her. Her mother Gaia, the primordial earth, and what remained of her father Uranus, the sky. Together they hatched a plan. When the time came for the birth, Rhea didn't go to the palace. Instead, she fled in the dead of night to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Ida, or according to some accounts, Mount Dicte. The location varied in the telling, but the secrecy remained constant. This child would be born in darkness, away from Kronos' watchful eyes. The labour was long and difficult. Rhea gave birth alone, or aided only by nymphs and the spirit of the earth itself. And when the child finally emerged, crying out with the voice that would one day command thunder, Rhea named him Zeus. But there was no time to rest, no moment to marvel at this newborn god. Rhea had to return to Kronos before her absence raised suspicion. She took a large stone, roughly the size and shape of a swaddled infant. She wrapped it in baby's clothing, making it look exactly like a newborn child. Then she hid Zeus in the cave, entrusting him to the nymphs and to the protection of the Curetes, warrior spirits who would guard him. Rhea returned to Kronos, exhausted from childbirth, carrying the stone wrapped in cloth. Kronos, paranoid and impatient, didn't even look closely. He simply took what he thought was his 6th child and swallowed it whole. The stone tumbled down his throat and settled in his stomach alongside his 5 imprisoned children, and Kronos believed he had once again thwarted fate. But fate, as the Greeks knew well, cannot be so easily defeated. Hidden in that Cretan cave, protected by warrior spirits and nourished by the goat Amalthea, whose milk had magical properties, Zeus began to grow. And with each passing day, the prophecy crept closer to its fulfillment. The cave where Zeus spent his infancy was no ordinary place. It was a sanctuary, a fortress, and a secret so well kept that Kronos never suspected his youngest child still lived. The island of Crete, with its mountain caves and dense forests, proved the perfect hiding place for the future king of gods. Zeus's guardians were as unusual as his circumstances. The nymphs Adrastea and Ida, daughters of Melicius, served as his nursemaids. They fed him the milk of the goat Amalthea, an animal so sacred that her hide would later become Zeus's aegis, his legendary shield. Some traditions say Amalthea was not a goat, but a nymph who owned a goat, or even a nymph who could transform into a goat. Regardless of the exact form, Amalthea's milk gave Zeus divine strength and nourishment, but milk wasn't his only sustenance. Bees brought him honey, the sweetest nectar of the earth, straight from the mountainside. These weren't ordinary bees, but sacred insects, perhaps touched by Gaia herself, providing the infant god with food fit for a future ruler of the cosmos. The Curetes, warrior spirits associated with the Cretan earth, played a crucial role in Zeus's survival. Whenever the infant cried, which even divine babies are known to do, the Curetes would dance around the cave entrance, clashing their spears against their shields. The noise drowned out Zeus's wails, ensuring that no sound would travel across the sea to Kronos' ears. They danced and shouted, creating a percussion that masked the presence of the hidden prince. This was Zeus's childhood. No palace halls or golden cradles, no royal court or servants attending to every need. Just a cave, the sound of clashing shields, the warmth of goat's milk, and the sweetness of wild honey. The future master of Olympus grew up in secrecy, learning even as an infant that survival required caution, and that power meant nothing without the cleverness to wield it. As Zeus grew from infant to child to young god, he learned the stories of the cosmos from his guardians. They told him about Gaia, the earth herself, who had helped save him, about Uranus, the sky, who had been overthrown, about the Titans who now ruled, and most importantly about his father Kronos, who had swallowed his siblings and would not hesitate to do the same to Zeus if given the chance. The young god's education was not just about the past. He learned about power and its costs. He understood that Kronos' fear had driven him to monstrous acts. He grasped that even gods could be vulnerable, that even rulers could fall. And he began to formulate a question that would shape his future. If Kronos could overthrow Uranus, and if he himself was prophesied to overthrow Kronos, what did that mean about the nature of power? Was every generation destined to violently replace the last? Or could there be a different way? These weren't idle philosophical musings. Zeus was growing into his destiny, his body strengthened on divine milk and honey, his mind sharpened on stories of cosmic struggle, and as he reached maturity, hidden away in his Cretan sanctuary, he began to plan. Not just his own survival, but the liberation of his siblings and the reshaping of the entire cosmic order. The prophecy had said one of Kronos' children would overthrow him. That child was Zeus, the hidden prince of Crete, the swallowed stone's replacement, the secret that would shake the foundations of the universe, and soon, very soon, Zeus would leave his cave and march to war. Zeus emerged from his Cretan cave as a fully grown god, powerful and determined. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, and now the time had come to confront his father and free his siblings. But he couldn't simply march up to Kronos and challenge him directly. The Titan king was too powerful, too established. Zeus needed an advantage, and he found it in an unlikely ally, Metis. Metis was a Titaness, a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, and she represented cunning, wisdom, and intelligent thought itself. Her name literally meant wisdom, or cunning counsel, and she would prove instrumental in Zeus's rise to power. When Zeus sought her help, Metis didn't hesitate. Perhaps she saw the cruelty in Kronos' actions. Perhaps she understood that the age of the Titans was ending. Or perhaps she simply recognized that Zeus represented something new, a chance for cosmic change. Together, Zeus and Metis concocted a plan. They would use trickery, not violence. Kronos' paranoia, and his habit of swallowing first and asking questions, never had created a weakness. If they could just get Kronos to ingest the right substance, they could force him to vomit up everything he'd swallowed, including Zeus's 5 siblings. Metis prepared a special potion, an emetic so powerful that even a Titan couldn't resist its effects. The mixture varied in different tellings. Some said it was wine mixed with mustard. Others claimed it was a blend of salt and water. Whatever the exact recipe, the potion had one purpose: to make Kronos violently ill. Now they needed to get Kronos to drink it. According to the most common version of the story, Zeus disguised himself as a cupbearer, a servant whose job was to serve wine to Kronos at his court. It was a dangerous gambit. If Kronos recognized his younger son, the son he thought he'd swallowed, the plan would fail instantly. But Zeus was confident. Metis' potion was ready, and fate was on their side. Zeus approached the Titan king, bowed respectfully, and offered him the cup. Kronos, never suspecting that this cupbearer was his own son, took the drink and consumed it in one long gulp. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kronos' face contorted. His stomach lurched. The potion was working. What happened next was both grotesque and miraculous. Kronos began to vomit, but what came up wasn't just the contents of his stomach, it was his children. First came the stone, the wrapped rock that Rhea had given him in place of Zeus. It shot out of Kronos' mouth, and would later be set up at Delphi as the Omphalos stone, the navel of the world, marking the centre of the earth in Greek tradition. Then came the gods themselves, in reverse order of how they'd been swallowed. Poseidon emerged first, no longer an infant but fully grown. The gods had matured inside their father's belly, had grown and developed despite their imprisonment. Hades followed, blinking in the light he hadn't seen since his birth. Then came Hera, beautiful and fierce. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, stepped forth, and finally Hestia, the eldest, emerged last, completing the liberation. 5 gods stood before Kronos, freed from their prison. 5 siblings that Zeus had never known, but who were about to become his greatest allies. They were disoriented, certainly, confused, absolutely. But they were also furious. They had been imprisoned before they could even live, stolen from their mother, trapped in darkness, denied their divine birthright, and the one responsible stood before them, weakened and still reeling from the effects of the potion. Zeus stepped forward and revealed himself. He told his siblings about his hidden childhood, about Rhea's sacrifice, about the prophecy that had driven Kronos to such monstrous actions. He spoke of a new order, a better way to rule the cosmos. He promised them power, domains of their own, freedom from tyranny. And he asked them to join him in overthrowing the Titans. The response was unanimous. They would fight. For their mother who had saved Zeus. For their own stolen childhoods. For the right to rule themselves. For revenge against their father who had valued his throne more than his children. But even with 6 Olympian gods united, overthrowing the Titans would not be easy. Kronos was not alone. He had his fellow Titans, powerful beings who had ruled for untold ages. He had supporters, vast armies, and the advantage of established power. Zeus and his siblings would need more than just righteous anger. They would need allies, weapons, and a strategy. The stage was set for a war that would shake the foundations of the universe. A war between the old gods and the new, between the Titans entrenched in their power and the Olympians hungry for freedom, between father and son, between past and future, between the age that was ending and the age that was about to begin. The Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, was about to commence. Wars between gods are not like wars between mortals. When immortals clash, the very fabric of reality strains. Mountains tremble, seas boil, the sky itself becomes a battlefield, and the war between the Titans and the Olympians, the Titanomachy, was the most catastrophic conflict the cosmos had ever seen. Zeus and his 5 siblings, freshly freed from Kronos' belly, stood together on Mount Olympus. They had claimed this mountain as their base, establishing their presence at the highest peak in Greece. From here, they would wage their war against the Titans, who had established themselves on Mount Olympus. 2 mountains, 2 armies, and the fate of the universe hanging in the balance. But Zeus knew that even with his siblings, they were outnumbered and outmatched. Kronos had ruled for eons. He had the support of many of the other Titans. Iapetus, fierce and warlike. Hyperion, the Titan of light. Coeus, representing intelligence and inquiry. Creus, associated with the heavenly constellations. And crucially, Kronos had Atlas, son of the Titan Iapetus, serving as his battlefield commander. Atlas was a brilliant military strategist, strong and cunning, and he would make the war incredibly difficult for Zeus. The Olympians needed allies. Zeus looked to his grandmother Gaia for guidance, and she gave him advice that would change everything. She told him about prisoners, not just any prisoners, but beings imprisoned by Uranus long ago and kept locked away by Kronos after his rise to power. Beings who had every reason to hate the current rulers of the cosmos. Deep beneath the earth, in the pit of Tartarus, 3 sets of brothers languished in darkness. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Sterops, and Arges, each with a single enormous eye in the centre of their forehead. These were master craftsmen, skilled beyond measure in the art of forging divine weapons, and the Hecaton Kairos, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, the 100-handed ones, each possessing 50 heads and 100 arms. These were beings of immense physical power, capable of hurling hundreds of boulders simultaneously in battle. Zeus knew he needed them. He journeyed to Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld, a place of punishment and imprisonment. There he found Campe, a monstrous she-dragon, who served as the jailer of the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires. She was a fearsome guardian, with the head of a woman, a serpentine body, and various animal heads emerging from her torso. Zeus battled Campe, and in their fierce combat he slew her, shattering the chains that bound the 6 imprisoned brothers. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires emerged into the light, free for the first time in ages. Zeus made them an offer. Join us in the war against the Titans, and you will never be imprisoned again. Help us overthrow those who kept you in chains, and when we win, you will have honoured positions in the new order. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, immediately set to work. They forged weapons unlike any the cosmos had seen before. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon of pure lightning that could be hurled with devastating effect. It crackled with electricity, glowed with divine power, and would become Zeus's signature weapon, the symbol of his authority. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a 3-pronged spear that would give him dominion over the seas, capable of stirring up storms, causing earthquakes, and splitting rocks. For Hades, they crafted the Helm of Darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer invisible, allowing for stealth and surprise attacks. Armed with these new weapons and backed by the immense power of the Hecatoncheires, the Olympians were ready to truly wage war. The initial clashes between the two sides were brutal. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, lighting up the sky with divine fire. Poseidon summoned earthquakes and tidal waves. Hades struck from the shadows, appearing and disappearing behind enemy lines. The Hecatoncheires proved devastating in battle. Each could hurl 300 massive boulders at once, creating a rain of stone that overwhelmed the Titan forces. It was like trying to fight a one-man artillery unit, except there were 3 of them, and each had 100 hands. The battlefield became chaos, with mountains being torn apart and hurled at the enemy, the earth splitting open, the seas rising and crashing against divine armies. Not all of the Titans fought for Kronos. 2 notable exceptions were Themis, the Titaness of divine law and order, and her son Prometheus, the clever Titan who could see the future. Prometheus, gifted with foresight, knew how the war would end. He advised his brother Epimetheus to stay out of the conflict, and both sided with Zeus. Themis joined them, bringing her wisdom and sense of justice to the Olympian cause. The goddess Styx, daughter of Oceanus, was also among the first to join Zeus, bringing her 4 children: Nike, victory; Kratos, strength; Zelos, rivalry; and Bia, force. These became Zeus's constant companions and enforcers. The war raged for 10 years, 10 years of constant battle, of divine bloodshed, of reality itself straining under the weight of cosmic violence. The earth shook continuously. Forests burned, rivers dried up or flooded. The mortal world, caught between 2 warring divine factions, suffered terribly. But neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Titans had experience and entrenched power. The Olympians had new weapons and burning motivation. Finally, in the 10th year, Zeus devised a final offensive. He gathered all his forces for one massive assault on Mount Olympus. The Hecatoncheires led the charge, creating a bombardment of boulders so intense that it blotted out the sun. Zeus held nothing back. He unleashed the full fury of his thunderbolts, hurling lightning with such intensity that the air itself caught fire. The heat was tremendous. Forests ignited. The very earth began to melt. Hesiod, the ancient Greek poet who chronicled this war in his Theogony, describes Zeus as no longer holding back his might. The king of the Olympians unleashed power so great that it seemed as if heaven and earth had united against the Titans. The sky rained lightning. The ground erupted with earthquake after earthquake. Steam rose as the divine fire met the earth. It was apocalyptic, a battle that threatened to unmake the very cosmos. Under this onslaught, the Titan defences finally broke. One by one they were overwhelmed. Kronos himself fought desperately, but even he couldn't withstand the combined might of Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's earthquakes, Hades's invisible attacks, and the 100-handed bombardment of the Hecaton Chiras. When the dust finally settled, Zeus and the Olympians stood victorious. But victory in war always demands a price, and Zeus needed to decide what to do with the defeated Titans. He had the defeated Titans bound in unbreakable chains, forged by the same Cyclopes who had made his thunderbolt. Then he cast them down into Tartarus, the same dark pit from which he had freed the Cyclopes and Hecaton Chiara. But there was a cruel poetry to the punishment. Zeus stationed the Hecaton Chiaras as guards of Tartarus, ensuring that the Titans would never escape. The very beings that Uranus had imprisoned, that Kronos had kept locked away, now served as jailers for the Titans themselves. The imprisoned had become the jailers, the oppressed had become the guards. Not all Titans were imprisoned. Prometheus and Epimetheus remained free for their support. Themis was honoured with a position in Zeus's new order. Atlas received a special punishment. He was condemned to hold up the sky itself, to bear the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for eternity. Some said this was because he had been the Titans' military commander. Others suggested it was because he had fought with particular ferocity. Regardless of the reason, Atlas became a monument to the Titans' defeat, forever holding up the cosmos he had fought to control. The Titanomachy was over. Zeus and the Olympians had won. A new era had begun, but ruling the cosmos would prove just as challenging as conquering it. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned in Tartarus, the victorious Olympians faced a new challenge: how to divide the cosmos among themselves. They had fought together, bled together, won together. Now they needed to determine who would rule what. This was a delicate moment. Wars had been fought over less. Families had been torn apart by disputes over inheritance. And these weren't just any family members. These were gods, immortal beings of immense power, who had just witnessed what happened when divine ambitions clashed. Zeus proposed a solution that was both simple and remarkably democratic for a king. They would draw lots. Instead of the strongest claiming the best domain, instead of fighting among themselves, instead of Zeus simply declaring himself ruler of everything, they would leave it to chance, or perhaps to fate, which in Greek thought wasn't quite the same as random chance. The Fates, the Moirai, had their role to play in all things. 3 lots were prepared, representing the 3 great realms of the cosmos: the sky and upper regions of the world, the seas and waters, the underworld and the realm of the dead. The earth itself would be common ground, accessible to all the gods, a neutral territory where none would have exclusive dominion. Zeus, Poseidon and Hades, the 3 brothers, the 3 sons of Kronos and Rhea, would each draw a lot. The 3 goddesses, Hestia, Demeter and Hera, while honoured and powerful, would not receive separate realms in this division. This reflected the deeply patriarchal nature of ancient Greek society, where men held the primary positions of authority. The goddesses would have temples, worship and significant influence, but the cosmic realms would be divided among the brothers. When the lots were drawn, the results shaped the Greek understanding of the universe. Zeus drew the heavens and the sky. This made him ruler of the upper world, master of the air, controller of weather and storms. He would reside on Mount Olympus, the highest peak, closest to the sky he now commanded. His domain included not just the physical sky, but also the role of ultimate authority over all the gods. Sky gods across many mythologies often hold supreme positions, and Zeus was no exception. Poseidon drew the seas, becoming lord of all waters, all oceans, rivers and springs. He would make his palace beneath the waves, ruling over a kingdom just as vast as his brothers. Poseidon's domain included not just peaceful seas, but raging storms, devastating tsunamis, and the power to cause earthquakes by striking the ground with his trident. He was Earthshaker, a title that reflected his power over land as well as water. Hades drew the shortest lot, literally and figuratively. He became ruler of the underworld, the realm of the dead, the dark kingdom beneath the earth, where mortal souls went after death. Many have interpreted this as Hades getting the worst realm, but that's not quite accurate. The underworld was crucial to Greek cosmology. It wasn't hell in the Christian sense. It was the inevitable destination of all mortals, a place of shadows but also a place of order, judgment, and balance. Hades' domain was vast, containing far more souls than there were living mortals at any given time. He was wealthy beyond measure, for all the precious metals and gems of the earth fell under his domain. His title, Pluto, literally meant wealth. The three brothers agreed to the division. There was apparently no fighting, no dispute, no war between siblings as there had been between the Olympians and Titans. The lot system had worked, or perhaps Zeus had ensured it worked. He was the youngest of the three, but had emerged as the clear leader during the Titanomachy. He had freed them all, strategized their victory, and united the Olympians. Whether by fate or by cunning, Zeus had secured for himself the realm of the sky, and with it the position of supreme authority. But Zeus's power came with responsibilities. As king of the gods, he had to maintain cosmic order. He couldn't simply rule through strength. He needed wisdom, judgment, and the ability to keep the sometimes fractious Olympian gods from tearing each other apart. He had to enforce divine law, settle disputes, and ensure that the cosmos functioned properly. Zeus established his court on Mount Olympus. This wasn't just a random choice. Olympus was the tallest mountain in Greece, its peak often wreathed in clouds, seeming to touch the sky itself. It was remote, inaccessible to mortals, a perfect place for the gods to reside. Here, Zeus built his palace, and here the other Olympian gods would gather for councils, feasts, and the ongoing drama of divine politics. The 12 major Olympians gradually took their places in this new order. Zeus himself, king and sky god. Hera, who would become his wife and queen. Poseidon, who had his own underwater realm but visited Olympus regularly. Athena, goddess of wisdom, who would be born in an unusual way. Apollo, god of light, music and prophecy. Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Ares, the god of war. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Hephaestus, god of fire and smithing. Hermes, messenger of the gods. Dionysus, god of wine. And Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Hades, though powerful, was not usually counted among the Olympians, because he resided in the underworld rather than on Olympus. Hestia, the gentle goddess of the hearth, similarly kept a low profile and was sometimes replaced in the count of 12 by Dionysus. But claiming the throne and establishing order were two different things. Zeus would soon learn that ruling gods was far more complicated than defeating Titans. His own family would challenge him. His relationship with Hera would be marked by jealousy and conflict, and new threats would emerge, creatures and beings that threatened to undo everything Zeus had fought to establish. The age of the Titans had ended, the age of the Olympians had begun. But Zeus's story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Just when Zeus thought he had secured his rule, just when the Olympians had settled into their new order, a new threat emerged. And this threat was unlike anything Zeus had faced before. Not an army of Titans, not a rival god, but a single creature, a monster so powerful, so terrifying, that it nearly undid everything Zeus had accomplished. Its name was Typhon. Typhon was born from Gaia, the earth herself, though accounts differ on exactly how this birth came about. According to Hesiod, Gaia, still angry about the imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus, united with Tartarus itself, the dark abyss, to produce this ultimate weapon against Zeus. Other versions claim Hera, fed up with Zeus's behaviour and jealous of how he had given birth to Athena from his own head, prayed to Gaia for a child more powerful than Zeus. Regardless of the exact circumstances, Typhon was born with one purpose: to destroy Zeus and overthrow the Olympians. Typhon was not a god. He was something else entirely. A primordial monster, the embodiment of volcanic forces, destructive winds and raw chaos. Descriptions of his appearance vary, but they all agree on one thing: he was massive, terrifying, and unlike any creature that had walked the earth before. According to Hesiod's account, Typhon was impossibly huge, so tall that his head brushed the stars, so wide that his arms could span from one end of the world to the other. From his shoulders grew 100 dragon heads, each breathing fire and speaking in different voices, some mimicking the languages of gods, others making bestial sounds that no mortal or immortal had heard before. From his eyes shone fire. His body from the waist down was covered in massive coils of vipers, writhing and snapping. His legs, in some versions, were themselves giant serpents instead of legs. His voice was thunder and volcanic eruption. When Typhon rose from the earth and began his march on Olympus, terror gripped the gods. Here was a being that didn't follow the rules of divine combat. He wasn't challenging Zeus to single combat or leading an army. He was a force of nature, chaos incarnate, and he was coming to tear down everything the Olympians had built. As Typhon approached, hurling kindled rocks and spouting great jets of fire from his 100 mouths, most of the Olympian gods fled. They transformed themselves into animals and fled to Egypt, hiding from this monster they couldn't comprehend how to fight. In some versions they took forms of Egyptian animals, which is how the Greeks explained the Egyptian gods with animal heads. It was a humiliating retreat, the gods of Olympus running in fear from a single monster. But Zeus stood his ground. He couldn't flee. He was the king of the gods, the one who had freed his siblings, led them to victory against the Titans, established the new cosmic order. If he ran now, everything would be lost. More than that, Typhon's power, while immense, challenged Zeus's very identity. Zeus controlled the sky and weather. Typhon was a storm personified, volcanic eruption given form. This was a battle between storm and storm, between chaos and order, between the rule of law and pure destructive force. Zeus armed himself with his thunderbolts. He met Typhon in a place that would be remembered as one of the greatest battlefields in mythology. The exact location varies. Some say Mount Cassios in Syria, others say the volcanic fields of Italy, but wherever it occurred, the battle was cataclysmic. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts, striking Typhon again and again with divine lightning. The monster's 100 heads shrieked and roared. Fire met fire, thunder met thunder. The earth shook, mountains crumbled. The very air burned from the intensity of their combat. Zeus, according to Hesiod, held nothing back. He hurled his thunderbolts with such fury that the heat began to melt the earth itself. But Typhon wasn't defeated easily. In some versions of the story, particularly the one told by Apollodorus, Typhon actually managed to overpower Zeus. The monster's serpentine coils wrapped around the king of the gods, constricting, crushing. And in the struggle, Typhon did something horrific. He cut out Zeus's sinews with an adamantine sickle, the tendons and ligaments that gave the god his strength. Helpless, Zeus was imprisoned. Typhon took the sinews and hid them in a cave, guarded by the she-dragon Delphin. It looked like chaos had won. The king of the gods was defeated, mutilated, imprisoned. Typhon began his rampage across the world, filling it with monsters and destruction, preparing to storm Olympus itself. But Zeus had allies. Hermes, the clever messenger god, and either Pan or Aegipan, depending on the telling, devised a plan to rescue Zeus. They snuck into the cave where the sinews were hidden. Through a combination of trickery and stealth, they recovered Zeus's sinews and restored them to the god. Whole once more, Zeus emerged from his imprisonment, angrier than ever. The final battle between Zeus and Typhon was even more ferocious than the first. Zeus didn't just use his thunderbolts this time. He pelted the monster from a distance, then closed in to strike with an adamantine sickle, the same kind of weapon Typhon had used against him. Wounded and furious, Typhon fled, but Zeus pursued relentlessly. They fought across the landscape, leaving destruction in their wake. Finally, Zeus gained the upper hand. He struck Typhon with thunderbolt after thunderbolt, overwhelming the monster's 100 heads with divine fire. When Typhon finally fell, Zeus had to decide what to do with him. You couldn't kill such a primordial force completely, couldn't destroy chaos itself. So Zeus did what he had done with the Titans. He imprisoned him. According to the most popular version, Zeus hurled the entire mountain of Mount Etna on top of Typhon, burying the monster beneath the weight of a volcano. Typhon remained alive, trapped, his fiery breath and struggles causing the volcano's eruptions. Every time Etna erupted, spewing lava and ash, the Greeks knew Typhon was raging beneath the earth. Every earthquake in the region was Typhon turning over in his rocky prison. The monster had become a geological force, his defeat literally reshaping the landscape of the Mediterranean. Other versions had Typhon cast into Tartarus along with the Titans, trapped in the deepest pit of the underworld. Some later accounts placed him beneath other volcanic regions, explaining different areas of geological activity through this single monster's imprisonment. Zeus's victory over Typhon was perhaps his greatest triumph. He had faced the ultimate challenge to his rule, had been defeated and mutilated, yet had recovered and emerged victorious. It established Zeus not just as king of the gods, but as the champion of order against chaos, the force that kept the universe from sliding back into primordial destruction. But Typhon's legacy didn't end with his imprisonment. Before his defeat, Typhon had mated with Echidna, the mother of all monsters, a creature who was half woman, half serpent. From their union came some of the most famous monsters in Greek mythology. Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the underworld, the Lenaean Hydra with its many heads that grew back when cut off, the Chimera, part lion, part goat, part serpent, the Sphinx, who would later plague Thebes, the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons. These children of Typhon would go on to be the challenges faced by heroes, particularly Heracles, in generations to come. Typhon represented something important in Greek thought, the idea that chaos never truly goes away, that the forces of destruction and disorder are always present beneath the surface, and that maintaining cosmic order requires constant vigilance and strength. Zeus had won this battle, but the struggle between order and chaos would continue in other forms throughout Greek mythology. If the Titanomachy was Zeus's war of liberation, and Typhon was his greatest single challenge, then the Gigantomachy, the war against the giants, was his war to defend what he had built. It was, in many ways, a test of whether the Olympian order could endure against those who sought to tear it down. The giants, or gigantes, were yet another generation of Gaia's children, born from the blood that fell from Uranus when Kronos castrated him. They had existed for ages, but they hadn't challenged the Titans during Kronos' reign. Now, with Zeus in power and the Titans imprisoned, Gaia looked at her defeated children locked away in Tartarus and decided to act. She had helped Zeus against Kronos, but she never intended for the Titans to be imprisoned forever. When Zeus didn't free them, when it became clear the new king had no intention of releasing the old gods, Gaia turned against the Olympians. She raised the giants and sent them to war against Zeus. These weren't monsters like Typhon. They were massive, powerful beings, each one a warrior in their own right, often depicted with serpentine legs or snake legs in place of feet. They represented brute force, primal strength, the raw power of the earth itself. And there were many of them, a whole race of giant warriors. The giants were led by several notable figures. Alcyoneus, sometimes called their king, who was said to be immortal as long as he fought in his homeland. Porphyrion, the giant king in other accounts, who was particularly bold and aggressive. Enceladus, whose strength was legendary. Ephialtes and other named giants each brought their own abilities to the battle. But there was something unique about this war, something that made it different from the Titanomachy. A prophecy stated that the giants could not be killed by gods alone. The Olympians would need a mortal hero to strike the final blow against each giant. This meant Zeus needed to involve mortals in what was essentially a divine conflict, a detail that would have profound implications for Greek mythology and the relationship between gods and heroes. The war began when the giants launched their assault on Olympus. They came with massive weapons, hurling whole trees and boulders at the home of the gods. The earth itself seemed to rebel against the sky. In some versions, they piled mountain on top of mountain, trying to literally climb to heaven and storm the Olympian palace. Zeus called upon all the Olympian gods to defend their home. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, took up her spear. Ares, god of brutal combat, prepared for battle. Poseidon raised earthquakes and tidal waves. Hephaestus, the divine smith, created weapons and fortifications. Apollo and Artemis readied their bows. Every major god had a role to play. But most crucially, Zeus called upon a mortal hero, Heracles. By this time in the mythological timeline, Heracles had completed his famous 12 labours and had proven himself the greatest of Greek heroes. Zeus revealed to him the prophecy that the giants could only truly die if a mortal struck them down. Heracles agreed to fight alongside the gods, becoming the first and perhaps greatest example of a mortal hero fighting in divine conflicts. The battles of the Gigantomachy were spectacular and brutal. Each giant required a combined effort from a god, and Heracles to defeat. Alcyoneus, the giant who couldn't die in his homeland, was shot by Heracles but kept rising each time he fell. Finally, on Athena's advice, Heracles dragged the giant out of his homeland's borders and killed him there, where the special protection didn't apply. Porphyrion, perhaps the most dangerous of the giants, attacked Heracles first, but then, in a moment of foolish arrogance, turned his attention to Hera. Zeus, seeing one of the giants lusting after his wife, struck Porphyrion with a thunderbolt, stunning him, and Heracles finished him with an arrow. The king of the giants fell. Enceladus tried to flee the battlefield when he saw his fellow giants falling. But Athena wasn't about to let him escape. She picked up the entire island of Sicily and hurled it at the fleeing giant, burying him underneath. According to legend, Enceladus remained alive beneath Mount Etna, and his struggles, like Typhon's, caused the volcano's eruptions and the region's earthquakes. Ephialtes was shot in his left eye by Apollo, and his right eye by Heracles. Other giants met similarly dual-natured deaths, always requiring both divine and mortal intervention. Dionysus, the god of wine, killed the giant Eurytus. Hermes, wearing Hades' helm of darkness to become invisible, struck down Hippolytus. The fates themselves joined the battle, wielding bronze clubs, showing that even destiny took sides in this cosmic conflict. The war was long and difficult, but eventually the Olympians and Heracles prevailed. The giants were defeated, killed, and in many cases buried beneath mountains and islands. The Greek world was dotted with locations said to be the graves of giants. Every time an earthquake struck, people believed it was a buried giant stirring in his tomb. Every volcanic eruption was the fiery breath of a defeated enemy still raging beneath the earth. Gaia, seeing her children defeated once again, retreated. She didn't give up her anger at Zeus, but she stopped actively waging war against him. The cosmic order had been tested and had held. Zeus and the Olympians had proven they could defend their rule not just against the old generation of Titans, but against new threats, against the very forces of the earth itself. The Gigantomachy established several important precedents in Greek mythology. It showed that the gods sometimes needed mortal heroes, that the relationship between divine and human wasn't purely one of worship from below and indifference from above. It demonstrated that Zeus's rule was stable, that he could rally all the Olympians to a common cause, and it reinforced the idea that each generation of gods had to fight to maintain their position, that power in the Greek cosmos was never guaranteed but always earned through strength, cunning, and the ability to unite allies against common foes. With the giants defeated, Zeus had now survived and overcome 3 major challenges to his rule: the Titanomachy, Typhon, and the Gigantomachy. His position as king of the gods seemed finally secure, but ruling Olympus wasn't just about fighting external enemies. It was also about managing the complex, often dysfunctional family of the Olympian gods themselves. And nowhere was that complexity more evident than in Zeus's marriage to Hera. Zeus's relationship with his sister Hera was one of the most complicated and turbulent in all of mythology. She was his wife, his queen, the mother of several of his children, and his most persistent antagonist. Their marriage represented both the ideal of divine royalty and the dysfunction of a relationship built on power, betrayal, and impossible expectations. Hera was, in many ways, Zeus's equal. She was a daughter of Kronos and Rhea, swallowed like her brothers and sisters, freed along with them, and a veteran of the Titanomachy. She was goddess of marriage and family, queen of the gods, and the protector of married women. She was beautiful, powerful, and fiercely proud. And she had absolutely no tolerance for Zeus's constant infidelities. The courtship between Zeus and Hera, according to tradition, began when Zeus transformed himself into a small, bedraggled cuckoo bird. He appeared to Hera during a storm, shivering and pathetic. She took pity on the poor bird, holding it close to keep it warm. Then Zeus revealed his true form and, in that moment of vulnerability she had shown, expressed his desire to marry her. Some versions of the story suggest Zeus was more forceful in his courtship, that Hera initially rejected him and only agreed to marriage after Zeus appeared in the form of various creatures and eventually wore down her resistance. Regardless of how the marriage came about, it did happen, and it established Hera as Zeus's principal wife and queen of Olympus. Their wedding was, by all accounts, spectacular. All the gods attended. Gaia herself gave Hera a wedding gift of golden apples that granted immortality, which Hera planted in her garden, tended by the Hesperides. The marriage seemed to promise a golden age of divine harmony, a king and queen ruling together over the cosmos, but Zeus's nature made that harmony impossible. As king of the gods, he had tremendous power, and he used that power to pursue whomever he desired, both goddesses and mortal women. He had affairs constantly, fathering children across the Greek world, transforming himself into various shapes to seduce or deceive his targets. Bulls, swans, showers of gold. Zeus used every trick he could to add to his long list of lovers. Hera, as goddess of marriage and protector of marital fidelity, found herself in an impossible position. Her own husband was the greatest violator of the sanctity of marriage. She couldn't punish Zeus directly. He was more powerful than her, and she couldn't challenge his authority without risking everything. So instead, Hera directed her rage at Zeus's lovers and their children. She became infamous for her jealous vengeance, pursuing Zeus's illegitimate offspring with relentless cruelty. She sent a gadfly to torment Io, one of Zeus's lovers, driving the woman mad and forcing her to wander the world. She delayed the birth of Apollo and Artemis, making their mother Leto suffer through impossibly long labour. She tried to kill Heracles, Zeus's mortal son, multiple times, sending serpents to his cradle when he was an infant, driving him mad later in life. She persecuted Dionysus for being born from Zeus and a mortal woman. The list of Hera's victims is long and tragic, but was Hera simply a jealous, vengeful goddess? Or was she a wronged wife lashing out in the only way she could against a husband who constantly humiliated her? Greek mythology doesn't present her as purely sympathetic or purely villainous. She was proud, powerful, and dangerous, but she also had genuine grievances. Zeus had married her, made her his queen, and then proceeded to act as if marriage vows meant nothing. Zeus, for his part, seemed to genuinely respect Hera in certain ways. He valued her counsel, listened to her opinions in divine assemblies, and never divorced her or set her aside despite their constant conflicts. He protected her when the giant Porphyrion tried to assault her during the Gigantomachy. When other gods plotted to overthrow Zeus, Hera was sometimes involved, but Zeus always forgave her, suggesting a complex dynamic where their relationship, however troubled, endured. Their children together reflected this complicated union. Ares, the god of war, was violent and impulsive, perhaps representing the conflict inherent in his parents' relationship. Hebe, goddess of youth, served as cupbearer to the gods, a more innocent figure. Aletheia, goddess of childbirth, helped bring new life into the world, though Hera would use her daughter to delay or complicate the births of Zeus's illegitimate children. Hephaestus, the divine smith, had a complicated origin story. Some versions say he was the son of Zeus and Hera, others that Hera gave birth to him alone, without Zeus, in an attempt to match her husband's solo birthing of Athena. The relationship between Zeus and Hera became a template for understanding divine and human marriages in Greek culture. They were the ultimate power couple, but they were also deeply dysfunctional, a reminder that even gods couldn't always maintain ideal relationships. Their marriage was about power dynamics, respect, betrayal, and the impossibility of perfect unions when personalities clash and expectations go unmet. And yet, despite everything, they remained married. Hera never left Zeus. Zeus never truly abandoned Hera. They were bound together, not just by their vows or their positions, but by something deeper, perhaps by fate itself. The king and queen of the gods, forever locked in a marriage that was simultaneously divine and deeply, recognizably human in its complications. Their relationship would continue to shape events in Greek mythology, particularly through Hera's persecution of Zeus's illegitimate children and lovers. But to understand Zeus fully, we need to examine those relationships, those countless affairs that made him both the father of gods and heroes, and the source of Hera's endless rage. Before Hera, and despite Hera, Zeus had relationships with numerous goddesses. These weren't casual flings or momentary indiscretions. They were significant unions that produced some of the most important figures in Greek mythology, gods and goddesses who would shape the Greek pantheon for millennia. Zeus's first wife, before Hera, was Metis. She was the Titaness who had helped Zeus free his siblings by creating the potion that made Kronos vomit them up. Metis represented cunning intelligence, wisdom, and wise counsel. Her name literally meant wisdom or prudence. Zeus married her, recognizing her value not just as a wife, but as an advisor, someone whose intelligence complemented his power. But then came a prophecy, the same kind of prophecy that had plagued Uranus and Kronos before him. It was foretold that Metis would bear Zeus 2 children. The first would be a daughter, matching her father in wisdom. But the second would be a son who would overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown Kronos, just as Kronos had overthrown Uranus. The cycle threatened to repeat. Zeus, having learned from his father's mistakes, but perhaps not learned the right lesson, decided he wouldn't allow this prophecy to come true. But instead of swallowing his children like Kronos, Zeus swallowed his wife. When Metis was pregnant with their first child, Zeus tricked her into a shape-shifting contest, got her to transform into something small, and then swallowed her whole. Metis didn't die. According to Greek belief, the belly, not the brain, was the seat of thought and consciousness. By swallowing Metis, Zeus essentially integrated her wisdom into himself. She continued to exist inside him, advising him from within, making him wise as well as powerful. The child she was carrying, Athena, continued to develop inside Zeus's body. Eventually Zeus developed a splitting headache. The pain was so intense that he asked Hephaestus to split his skull with an axe. When the divine smith did so, Athena emerged fully grown and fully armed, wearing armour and carrying a spear springing from her father's forehead with a war cry. She became Zeus's favourite child, trusted to carry his thunderbolt, wearing his aegis, serving as goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and craft. The daughter Zeus feared might challenge him became his most loyal supporter. Zeus's second significant relationship was with Themis, the Titaness of divine law and order, one of the few Titans who had fought alongside the Olympians in the Titanomachy. She represented cosmic justice, the natural order of things, the way the universe should function. Her union with Zeus produced the Horae, goddesses of the seasons, and the Moirae, better known as the Fates. The Fates were three sisters who controlled destiny itself. Clotho spun the thread of life, determining when each person would be born. Lachesis measured the thread, determining how long each life would last. Atropos cut the thread, determining the moment of death. Even Zeus himself was subject to the Fates, a profound theological statement in Greek thought. The king of the gods was powerful, but even he couldn't escape destiny, couldn't change what was fated to be. Zeus's relationship with his sister Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, produced Persephone. This daughter would become central to one of Greek mythology's most important stories, her abduction by Hades and the origin of the seasons. Zeus played a complicated role in that myth, having apparently agreed to let Hades marry Persephone without asking Demeter's permission, causing his sister tremendous grief. Another significant divine relationship was with Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory. Zeus spent 9 consecutive nights with Mnemosyne, and from this union came the 9 Muses, goddesses who presided over the arts and sciences. Calliope governed epic poetry, Clio governed history, Erato governed love poetry, Euterpe governed music and lyric poetry, Melpomene governed tragedy, Polyhymnia governed hymns, Terpsichore governed dance, Thalia governed comedy, and Urania governed astronomy. These 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne would inspire countless poets, musicians and artists throughout Greek history and beyond. Zeus's relationship with the Titaness Leto was particularly important and particularly troubled. When Leto became pregnant with Zeus's children, Hera's jealousy knew no bounds. She forbade Leto from giving birth on any land, whether mainland or island. Leto wandered desperately, heavy with pregnancy, searching for a place to give birth. But Hera's curse kept her from finding sanctuary. Finally, Leto found a floating island, Delos, which wasn't technically land because it drifted on the sea. Here, she could give birth without violating Hera's prohibition, but even then, Hera tried to stop the birth by preventing Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth and her own daughter, from attending to Leto. The other goddesses on Delos had to bribe Eileithyia with a magnificent necklace before she would help. When Leto finally gave birth, she bore twins. First came Artemis, who, despite being a newborn, immediately helped her mother deliver her twin brother Apollo. These 2 children of Zeus would become major Olympian deities. Artemis became goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and young women, fiercely protective of her mother and her virgin status. Apollo became god of music, poetry, prophecy, healing, and paradoxically plague. He established the oracle at Delphi and became one of the most important gods in the Greek pantheon. Zeus also had a relationship with the Pleiad Maia, one of the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas. She lived in a cave on Mount Cylin, and here Zeus visited her. From their union came Hermes, who would become the messenger of the gods. Even as an infant, Hermes displayed remarkable cleverness, stealing Apollo's cattle on the day he was born. Zeus was impressed by his son's cunning and silver tongue, and appointed him as messenger and herald of the gods, a role Hermes fulfilled with quick wit and even quicker feet, wearing his famous winged sandals. The relationship between Zeus and Dione is particularly interesting because Dione was said to be Zeus's consort at Dodona, one of the oldest oracles dedicated to Zeus. In Homer's Iliad, Dione is named as the mother of Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. However, the more common tradition has Aphrodite born from the sea foam after Kronos castrated Uranus, making her much older than the Olympians. Zeus seems to have adopted her as his daughter, regardless of her true origins, welcoming her into the Olympian family. These divine relationships produced many of the Olympian gods, established the divine hierarchy, and shaped the Greek understanding of the cosmos. But Zeus didn't limit his affections to goddesses. Some of his most famous affairs and some of his most renowned children came from his relationships with mortal women. These unions between god and mortal would produce the heroes of Greek mythology, men and women of exceptional ability, who would change the course of human history, fight monsters, found cities, and blur the line between human and divine. Zeus's affairs with mortal women were legendary, quite literally. These stories were told and retold, painted on pottery, carved into temple friezes, recounted in epic poems and tragic plays. They represented something profound in Greek thought, the possibility of connection between human and divine, the idea that mortals could, however briefly, touch the realm of the gods. But they also represented something darker, the use of divine power to fulfill divine desire regardless of mortal consent. One of the most famous of Zeus's mortal lovers was Europa, a Phoenician princess whose beauty caught the god's eye. Zeus transformed himself into a magnificent white bull, beautiful and gentle, and mixed with her father's herds. When Europa and her friends came to the meadow to gather flowers, they noticed this unusual bull. Europa, charmed by its docility, approached it, fed it flowers, and eventually climbed onto its back. The moment she was seated, Zeus revealed his plan. He ran toward the sea and plunged into the waves, swimming across the Mediterranean while Europa clung to his back, terrified and amazed. He carried her to the island of Crete, where he revealed his true identity and made her his lover. Europa bore Zeus 3 sons, Minos, who would become king of Crete, and, after his death, a judge in the underworld, Rhadamanthus, another just ruler who also became an underworld judge, and Sarpedon, who would lead Lycian forces in the Trojan War. Zeus ensured Europa was well cared for after their affair ended. She eventually married the king of Crete, becoming the island's queen, and her name lived on in history. The continent of Europe was named after her, a Phoenician princess carried west by a god, representing the cultural exchanges between East and West in the ancient Mediterranean. Another famous affair involved Danaë, daughter of King Acrisius of Argos. An oracle had warned Acrisius that his grandson would kill him. Desperate to prevent this prophecy, Acrisius locked his daughter in a bronze chamber, a tower or underground room, where she could never meet a man, and thus could never bear children. But prophecy, as Greek myths constantly remind us, cannot be avoided by mere precaution. Zeus, seeing Danaë's plight and desiring her, transformed himself into a shower of golden rain. The god poured through the roof of her bronze prison, gleaming and impossible, and impregnated her. 9 months later, Danaë gave birth to a son, Perseus. When Acrisius discovered his daughter had a child, he was horrified. He couldn't bring himself to kill his daughter and grandson directly, but he also couldn't let them live freely. So he placed Danaë and baby Perseus in a wooden chest and cast it into the sea, hoping the waves would do what he couldn't. Zeus, watching over his mortal lover and their son, guided the chest to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Perseus grew up to become one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. He slew Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. He rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, and eventually, accidentally, he fulfilled the prophecy. During athletic games in a neighbouring kingdom, Perseus threw a discus that went off course, struck a spectator, and killed him. That spectator was his grandfather Acrisius, who had travelled there hoping to avoid his prophesied fate. Leda, queen of Sparta and wife of King Tyndareus, was another of Zeus's mortal conquests. Zeus came to her in the form of a swan, a beautiful bird seeking protection from an eagle that supposedly hunted it. Leda sheltered the swan, and Zeus in that form seduced her. She also lay with her husband Tyndareus that same night. The result was miraculous and complex. Leda laid 2 eggs. From these eggs hatched 4 children, but their paternity was divided. 2 were children of Zeus, Polydeuces, known to Romans as Pollux, and Helen, who would become Helen of Troy, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships. 2 were children of Tyndareus, Castor and Clytemnestra. Castor and Polydeuces, often called the Dioscuri, became famous heroes and, after their deaths, were placed in the heavens as the constellation Gemini. Helen's beauty would eventually lead to the Trojan War, making her one of the most consequential figures in Greek mythology. Zeus's affair with Io, a priestess of Hera, was particularly cruel. When Hera discovered the relationship, Zeus attempted to hide Io by transforming her into a white heifer, a cow. But Hera wasn't fooled. She demanded Zeus give her the beautiful cow as a gift, and Zeus, unable to refuse without revealing his deception, agreed. Hera then set Argus Panoptes, a giant with 100 eyes that never all closed at once, to watch over Io, ensuring Zeus couldn't approach her. Zeus sent Hermes to free Io. The messenger god lulled Argus to sleep by playing music and telling stories until all 100 eyes closed, then killed the giant. Hera, in honour of her faithful servant, placed Argus's 100 eyes on the tail of her sacred animal, the peacock. But Io's torment wasn't over. Hera sent a gadfly to sting her constantly, driving her mad. Io, trapped in the form of a cow unable to speak, chased by a tormenting fly, wandered across the known world. She travelled through Greece, swam across the strait later named the Bosphorus, literally cow crossing, journeyed through Thrace, Scythia and Egypt. Finally in Egypt Zeus restored her human form, and she bore him a son, Epiphus, who would become king of Egypt. The affair with Semele, daughter of Cadmus, king of Thebes, was perhaps the most tragic. Zeus fell in love with her and visited her in disguise. She became pregnant with his child. Hera, discovering the affair, decided on a particularly cruel revenge. She disguised herself as Semele's old nurse and visited the young woman, planting seeds of doubt. "How do you know this lover is really Zeus?" Hera asked. "He could be anyone. If he truly loves you, ask him to appear in his full divine glory, the same way he appears to his wife Hera. Demand proof of his identity." Semele, young and insecure, made Zeus promise on the river Styx the most binding oath a god could make, to grant her one wish. When he agreed, she asked him to appear to her in his true divine form, just as he appeared to Hera. Zeus, bound by his oath and knowing what would happen, tried to dissuade her, but she insisted. Zeus appeared in his full glory, with all his lightning and divine fire. No mortal could withstand such a sight. Semele was instantly consumed by flames, burned to ash by the very power that made Zeus who he was. But Zeus managed to save their unborn child. He cut the fetus from Semele's womb and sewed it into his own thigh, where the child continued to develop. Months later, Zeus gave birth to Dionysus, the god of wine, celebration and ecstasy, from his thigh. Dionysus was thus twice born, once from his mortal mother and once from his divine father. Perhaps Zeus's most important mortal lover, at least in terms of the heroic offspring produced, was Alcmene. She was married to Amphitryon, a grandson of Perseus, which meant she was descended from Zeus's earlier mortal affair with Danaë. Zeus desired Alcmene, but she was famous for her fidelity to her husband, so Zeus took on the form of Amphitryon himself. He came to Alcmene disguised as her husband, even extending the night so they could spend more time together. When the real Amphitryon returned the next day, Alcmene was understandably confused about why her husband was acting as if he hadn't just seen her. From Zeus's deception came pregnancy, but it was no normal pregnancy. On the same night Zeus, disguised as Amphitryon, lay with Alcmene. Her actual husband also returned and lay with her. The result was twins, Heracles, son of Zeus, and Iphicles, son of Amphitryon. Heracles would become the greatest hero of Greek mythology, completing the 12 labours, fighting alongside the gods in the Gigantomachy, and eventually ascending to Olympus to become a god himself. According to the historian Diodorus Siculus, Alcmene was Zeus's last mortal lover. After her, Zeus supposedly stopped having affairs with human women, having learned something from centuries of complications, betrayals, and tragedies. Whether that's true or just one historian's interpretation, Heracles does represent a kind of culmination of Zeus's mortal affairs, a hero so powerful, so exceptional, that he transcended his mortal heritage and achieved divinity. These mortal affairs weren't just stories of divine desire, they were explanations for the heroes who populated Greek mythology, justifications for why certain families had exceptional members, and explorations of what it meant to have divine parentage. The children of Zeus and mortal women were demigods, beings who existed between the human and divine realms, possessing exceptional abilities but also suffering exceptional fates. They were heroes not despite their mortal blood but because of it. Their humanity gave them drive, ambition, mortality's urgency. Their divine blood gave them strength, resilience, and the attention of the gods, for good or ill. And their father Zeus, for all his flaws as a husband and lover, often watched over his mortal children, intervening at crucial moments, ensuring their legacies lived on. For all his personal drama, Zeus's primary role was as king of the gods, supreme ruler of the cosmos, enforcer of divine and natural law. This wasn't a ceremonial position. Zeus actively governed, settling disputes, maintaining cosmic order, and ensuring the universe functioned as it should. He presided over the council of the gods on Mount Olympus, where the Olympians gathered to make decisions affecting both immortals and mortals. Zeus's court on Olympus was magnificent beyond mortal comprehension. The palaces of the gods gleamed with bronze and gold. Hephaestus, the divine smith, had crafted buildings and furnishings of such beauty and durability that they would last for eternity. The gods would gather in Zeus's great hall for feasts where they drank nectar and ate ambrosia, the food and drink of immortality. Hebe and later Ganymede served as cupbearers. The Muses provided entertainment with their music and poetry. It was paradise, at least in appearance. But Zeus's rule wasn't just about presiding over divine dinner parties. He had real responsibilities. As god of the sky and weather, he controlled rain, storms, and agricultural conditions that determined whether mortals ate or starved. As keeper of oaths, he ensured that promises, especially those sworn in his name, were kept. Those who broke oaths faced his wrath. As protector of guests and strangers, Zeus Xenios punished those who violated the sacred duty of hospitality. As Zeus Horkios, guardian of oaths, he struck down perjurers and oath breakers. Zeus also served as a judge in divine disputes. When gods argued over their domains, their honours, their rights, they brought their cases to Zeus. He would listen to both sides and render judgment, and his decisions were final. This didn't always make him popular. Gods who felt slighted by his rulings might grumble or plot, but Zeus's power was such that open rebellion was extremely risky. There was actually an attempt to overthrow Zeus, recorded in the Iliad. Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, unhappy with Zeus's decisions, conspired to bind him and usurp his power. While Zeus slept, they chained him with unbreakable bonds, perhaps the same kind used on the Titans. But Thetis, a sea, nymph who would later be the mother of Achilles, learned of the plot and summoned Briareus, one of the Hecatonchires, to free Zeus. The 100-handed giant broke the chains, and Zeus, once free, punished the conspirators. He hung Hera from the sky with golden chains with anvils attached to her feet. He threatened Poseidon and Athena. Eventually they begged forgiveness, and Zeus, perhaps recognizing that overly harsh punishment would only breed more resentment, relented. But the message was clear. Zeus's rule, while not unchallengeable, was firmly established through both power and strategic mercy. Zeus's relationship with fate and the fates themselves was complex. As mentioned earlier, even Zeus was subject to destiny. When the Trojan War raged, Zeus couldn't simply decree that his favourite side would win. Fate had determined certain outcomes, and even the king of the gods had to respect them. There are moments in the Iliad where Zeus weighs destinies in his golden scales, seeing which way fate tilts, and accepting the result even when it goes against his personal preferences. This subordination to fate was crucial in Greek thought. It meant the universe had a structure that even divine power couldn't completely override. Zeus was supremely powerful but not omnipotent. He could influence events, intervene in human affairs, support his favoured heroes, but he couldn't fundamentally rewrite destiny. When his son Sarpedon was fated to die in the Trojan War, Zeus mourned but ultimately allowed it to happen, recognizing that preventing his son's destined death would throw the cosmos into chaos. Zeus's justice was often harsh, but was generally considered fair by Greek standards. He punished mortals who committed hubris, excessive pride or arrogance that led them to overstep human limitations. When King Ixion tried to seduce Hera, Zeus bound him to a fiery wheel that spun eternally in Tartarus. When King Tantalus killed his own son and tried to feed him to the gods to test their omniscience, Zeus restored the son and punished Tantalus with eternal hunger and thirst in the underworld, forever reaching for food and water that receded whenever he tried to grasp them. But Zeus could also be merciful. He showed compassion to those who respected the gods, protected suppliants who sought his help, and rewarded mortals who displayed exceptional virtue. When the Great Flood came to destroy humanity because of their wickedness, Zeus allowed Deucalion, a just and pious man who was Prometheus' son, and his wife Pyrrha to survive by building an ark, similar to the flood stories found in Near Eastern mythology. Zeus also maintained relationships with various prophetic sites and oracles. The most famous was the oracle at Dodona in Epirus, one of the oldest oracles in Greece. Here, priests and priestesses interpreted Zeus's will by listening to the rustling of oak leaves, which was sacred to him, and observing the flight of birds. Pilgrims travelled from across the Greek world to Dodona, seeking answers to questions about war, agriculture, family matters, and personal destiny. Through his many roles, Zeus became associated with almost every aspect of Greek religious and civic life. He was invoked at the beginning of assemblies. Athletes at the Olympic Games, held in his honour at Olympia, competed not just for personal glory, but as offerings to Zeus. City-states built temples to Zeus, most notably the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, which took centuries to complete and stood as a testament to the god's importance. Zeus's rule represented order, law, civilization, and the proper functioning of the cosmos. Yes, he was flawed. Yes, his personal life was a mess. But in his role as king, he maintained the structure that kept the universe from sliding back into chaos. He was the necessary authority, the power that ensured storms came when needed, that justice, however harsh, was dispensed, that the balance between gods and mortals was maintained. And nowhere was Zeus's involvement in mortal affairs more visible than in the Trojan War, the greatest conflict of the Greek heroic age, where gods and mortals fought side by side, and where Zeus's role as ultimate arbiter would be tested again and again over 10 years of brutal combat. The Trojan War was the defining conflict of Greek mythology, a 10-year siege that brought together the greatest heroes of the age, divided the gods, and ended with the destruction of one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. And at the centre of this conflict, managing, manipulating, and occasionally despairing over the chaos, was Zeus. The war began because of Zeus's involvement, though indirectly. Paris, Prince of Troy, had been asked to judge a beauty contest between 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera offered power, Athena offered wisdom and skill in war, and Aphrodite offered the most beautiful woman in the world as his wife. Paris chose Aphrodite, earning the eternal hatred of Hera and Athena. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, and daughter of Zeus himself, from his affair with Leda. Paris's abduction of Helen triggered the Greek expedition against Troy, and the goddess's grudges ensured that the war would be brutal, with divine intervention on both sides. Zeus's position in the Trojan War was complicated. Troy was one of his favourite cities. King Priam regularly offered sacrifices to him, and the Trojans were pious and respectful to the gods. But Zeus also had Greek children and heroes he favoured. More importantly, Zeus knew how the war would end. Fate had determined that Troy would fall, that Hector would die, that Achilles would die, that the city would burn. Zeus couldn't change these outcomes without upending cosmic order, but he could influence how and when they happened. Initially, Zeus tried to remain neutral, but that proved impossible when the gods themselves chose sides. Hera and Athena supported the Greeks, still furious about the judgment of Paris. Aphrodite supported Troy, as did Apollo and Ares. Poseidon favoured the Greeks despite his usual rivalry with Zeus. The war became as much about divine politics as human combat. Zeus made his position clear early in the Iliad. He supported both sides, but ultimately he would ensure fate was fulfilled. When the gods tried to intervene directly in the fighting, Zeus called them all to Mount Olympus and forbade them from interfering, threatening to hurl anyone who disobeyed into Tartarus. It was one of the few times Zeus exercised his authority so directly against the entire divine assembly. But the gods, being gods, couldn't help themselves. They kept interfering anyway, just more subtly. Athena disguised herself and influenced Greek warriors. Apollo protected Hector. Aphrodite literally pulled Paris out of single combat with Menelaus when he was about to lose. Zeus would get frustrated, issue warnings, occasionally punish minor infractions, but he couldn't completely control the divine involvement without completely overriding free will, which would break the cosmic order he was trying to maintain. One of the most dramatic moments of Zeus's involvement came when Thetis, the sea nymph and mother of Achilles, approached him with a request. Her son had been insulted by Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, and had withdrawn from battle in rage. Thetis asked Zeus to honour her son by letting the Trojans win battles while Achilles sat out, humiliating the Greeks and proving how essential Achilles was to their cause. Zeus agreed, despite knowing this would anger Hera and complicate the war. He owed Thetis a debt. She had helped free him when the other gods had tried to overthrow him. So Zeus tilted the war in Troy's favour for a time. Hector led the Trojans in devastating attacks. The Greeks were pushed back to their ships. It looked like the siege might fail. Hera, seeing this, tried to manipulate Zeus. She seduced him, dressed in borrowed finery from Aphrodite, and lulled him to sleep, allowing the other gods to intervene on behalf of the Greeks without Zeus's knowledge. When Zeus woke and discovered the deception, he was furious. He reminded Hera and all the gods of his supreme power, how he could easily punish them all, how he alone determined the course of events. He reasserted control, ensuring the war would proceed according to destiny, not according to divine politics. Zeus's relationship with his various children in the war was particularly poignant. He had sons fighting on both sides. Sarpedon, his son by Europa, was a Lycian prince fighting for Troy. Zeus loved Sarpedon and wanted to save him when his death approached, but destiny decreed otherwise. In one of the Iliad's most touching moments, Zeus wept tears of blood as his son fell in battle, killed by Patroclus. He could have saved Sarpedon, could have overridden fate, but doing so would have thrown the cosmos into chaos. So he let his son die, then honoured him by having Apollo and the personifications of sleep and death carry his body back to Lycia for proper burial. Zeus also had to watch as the Greek heroes, many descended from him through various lines, fought and died. He saw Heracles' descendants fighting. He watched as mortals prayed to him for victory, offering sacrifices, making vows. He was the supreme god, but even he couldn't prevent the suffering and loss that war inevitably brings. Throughout the war, Zeus used his scales of justice to weigh destinies. He would place the fate of the Greeks on one side and the Trojans on the other, seeing which way the scales tipped. This wasn't him deciding outcomes. This was him checking what fate had already determined. When the scales showed that Hector was destined to die at Achilles' hands, Zeus allowed it to happen, despite his fondness for the Trojan hero. The fall of Troy itself, while not directly shown in the Iliad, was something Zeus permitted. When the Greeks built the wooden horse and the Trojans, against warnings, pulled it into their city, Zeus didn't intervene. When Greek warriors emerged from the horse and opened the gates for their army, when Troy burned and its people were slaughtered or enslaved, Zeus allowed it all because it had been fated from the beginning. Some versions of the myth suggest Zeus had an even deeper purpose for the Trojan War. According to Cypria, one of the lost epics of the Trojan War cycle, Zeus orchestrated the entire conflict to reduce the human population, which had grown so large that Earth herself, Gaia, complained about the burden. The war killed countless heroes and warriors, and its effects rippled across the Greek world for generations. Zeus's role in the Trojan War demonstrated his complex nature. He was powerful but not omnipotent, wise but not infallible, caring but not sentimental. He had to balance his personal affections against cosmic necessity, his power against fate, his desire to protect his children against the need to let destiny unfold. It was perhaps Zeus's most nuanced portrayal in Greek mythology, showing a god who ruled not through simple force, but through difficult choices, political maneuvering, and acceptance of losses that even he couldn't prevent. Zeus's presence permeated Greek religious life, and his symbols became some of the most recognizable icons in ancient art. The thunderbolt, the eagle, and the oak tree represented different aspects of Zeus's power and character, and temples dedicated to him stood in every major city. The thunderbolt was Zeus's primary weapon and most famous symbol. Forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy, it represented divine power, sudden judgment, and the ability to enforce cosmic law through overwhelming force. Artists depicted Zeus either holding the thunderbolt or in the act of hurling it. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of authority, the physical manifestation of Zeus's right to rule. When Zeus struck someone with a thunderbolt, it was both execution and divine judgment, the ultimate expression of his will. Places struck by lightning were considered sacred to Zeus. The Greeks would fence off these areas and dedicate them to Zeus Katibates, Zeus who descends. Altars would be set up within these enclosures and sacrifices offered. There's something profound in this practice, recognition that divine power could reach down from the heavens at any moment, that Zeus's presence wasn't confined to temples, but could manifest anywhere, suddenly and overwhelmingly. The eagle was Zeus's sacred bird, representing his sovereignty over the sky and his keen, far-seeing vision. Eagles were believed to be the only birds that could fly directly into the sun without being blinded, making them perfect symbols for the god who ruled the heavens. Zeus could transform into an eagle, as he did when abducting Ganymede. Eagles appeared as omens, their flight patterns interpreted as messages from Zeus himself. In art, Zeus was often shown with an eagle perched on his sceptre or arm, and the bird became so associated with authority that it would later become the symbol of the Roman Empire, which adopted Zeus as Jupiter. The oak tree held special significance in Zeus's worship. Oaks were sacred to him, particularly at his oracle at Dodona. These trees symbolize strength, endurance, and deep roots, appropriate for the god who provided stability to the cosmos. The Greeks believed oak trees could communicate Zeus's will. At Dodona, priests called the Seloi would interpret the rustling of oak leaves, believing the sound was Zeus speaking through nature. Acorns, with their shape and their role in providing sustenance, were sometimes associated with Zeus's fertility aspects. The bull was another animal sacred to Zeus, particularly in Cretan cult practices. This connected to his transformation into a bull to abduct Europa and to pre-Greek Minoan religious practices, where bull imagery was prominent. When Greeks colonized or incorporated Minoan culture, they associated the sacred bull with Zeus, creating a synthesis of older and newer religious practices. Zeus's major cult centers were spread across the Greek world, but two stood out: Olympia and Dodona. Olympia, in the western Peloponnese, was Zeus's grandest temple complex. Here stood one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, created by the sculptor Phidias around 435 BCE. The statue was enormous, seated, made of ivory and gold over a wooden frame, showing Zeus enthroned, holding a figure of Nike, victory, in his right hand and a sceptre topped with an eagle in his left. The statue's majesty was such that people who saw it felt they had truly witnessed the god's presence. Unfortunately, the statue was destroyed or lost in late antiquity, and we know it only from descriptions and depictions on coins. But Olympia was more than just the statue. It was the site of the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in Zeus's honour. The Games began in 776 BCE and continued for over 1,000 years. Athletes from across the Greek world would gather to compete, and a sacred truce was declared, halting all wars so competitors could travel safely. Victors weren't just celebrated as great athletes, they were seen as favoured by Zeus, their victories a form of divine recognition. The games included sacrifices to Zeus, particularly the sacrifice of 100 oxen on the great ash altar that stood before his temple. This altar wasn't made of stone, but of compacted ash from centuries of burnt offerings, a monument built from devotion itself. Dodona in northwestern Greece was equally important but different in character. This was Zeus's oracle, one of the oldest in Greece, possibly predating even Greek settlement in the region. Here, Zeus was honoured as Zeus Naios, associated with a sacred spring and grove of oak trees. The site had a distinctive acoustic quality. Wind moving through the oaks created sounds that priests interpreted as divine messages. Bronze gongs hung around the sanctuary, humming and chiming in the wind, adding to the mystical atmosphere. Pilgrims came to Dodona with questions written on lead tablets. These tablets have been found by archaeologists, giving us direct insight into what ancient Greeks asked their gods. The questions range from the profound to the mundane. Should I marry this person? Will my farm succeed? Should our city go to war? Where are my missing slaves? Zeus's oracle at Dodona answered them all, speaking through rustling leaves and ringing bronze. Zeus Xenios was honoured in the courtyards of Greek homes, where altars to Zeus the Hospitable protected both guests and hosts. Greek hospitality was a sacred duty, and Zeus enforced it. To turn away a stranger seeking shelter, to harm a guest, or to abuse a host's generosity was to offend Zeus personally. This belief helped maintain civility in a world where travel was dangerous and strangers often came without warning. Zeus Horkios, guardian of oaths, had altars where contracts were sealed and promises sworn. Breaking an oath made in Zeus's name was a serious offence, bringing divine punishment. This extended to treaties between city-states. When Greek cities made peace agreements, they would swear by Zeus, invoking his wrath on whoever broke the treaty first. Festivals dedicated to Zeus occurred throughout the year. The Duscia was celebrated in Athens, a somewhat sombre festival where sacrifices were made to Zeus Melikios, Zeus the easily appeased, asking him to avert his anger and grant prosperity. The Nemean Games, like the Olympics, were held in Zeus's honour every 2 years at Nemea. The Pan-Hellenic Games at Isthmia and Pythia, while primarily honouring other gods, also recognised Zeus as king of the Olympians. Zeus's worship reflected Greek values, respect for authority, honour for oaths, the importance of hospitality, appreciation for justice and law. But it also reflected Greek understanding of power, that it must be both strong and wise, that even supreme authority has limits, that justice requires judgment, not just force. The temples, the festivals, the symbols, all of these created a religious framework where Zeus was constantly present in Greek life, not as a distant abstract deity, but as a force that could intervene at any moment, for good or ill. When storms came, Zeus was there. When oaths were sworn, Zeus was witness. When strangers knocked at your door, Zeus was watching to see how you would treat them. This wasn't just theology, it was practical religion, shaping behaviour, establishing standards, creating a shared sense of divine observation and cosmic justice that unified the fractious Greek city-states under a common religious framework. Zeus's relationship with humanity was complex, marked by gifts and punishments, mercy and wrath, creation and destruction. Some of his most important interactions with mortals came not through love affairs, but through myths that explained human suffering, the origin of evil, and why life is difficult. The story of Prometheus is one of the most philosophically rich in Greek mythology. Prometheus was a Titan, son of Iapetus, who had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy. His name meant forethought, and he was known for his intelligence and his special affection for humanity. According to some accounts, Prometheus himself had created humans, moulding them from clay while Athena breathed life into them. The conflict between Prometheus and Zeus began over a seemingly simple question. When humans sacrificed animals to the gods, which parts should go to the gods, and which to the humans? Prometheus was asked to divide a sacrificial bull. He created 2 piles. One contained the meat and edible organs covered with unattractive hide and stomach. The other contained the bones covered with glistening fat. Zeus was asked to choose first. Zeus saw through the deception. He knew the glistening pile was bones, but he chose it anyway, perhaps to establish grounds for punishing Prometheus, and through him, humanity. From that point forward, humans burned the bones and fat for the gods, while keeping the meat for themselves. But Zeus's anger at being tricked would have consequences. Zeus punished humanity by withholding fire. Humans shivered in cold, ate raw food, and lived in darkness. They had no technology, no warmth, no light. They existed but barely lived. Prometheus, seeing their suffering and feeling responsible, couldn't stand by. He travelled to Mount Olympus, stole fire from the god's hearth, or, in some versions, from the sun itself, hidden in a hollow fennel stalk, and brought it to humanity. Fire was transformative. It gave humans warmth, the ability to cook food, to forge metal, to create technology. It elevated them above mere animals. But it also enraged Zeus. Fire was divine, a privilege of the gods, and Prometheus had stolen it. Zeus had to punish the Titan, and the punishment would be eternal. Zeus had Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. Every day, an eagle, Zeus's sacred bird, adding insult to injury, would come and eat Prometheus's liver. Every night the liver would regenerate. Every day the torture would begin again. This went on for centuries, possibly thousands of years, an eternal punishment for an act of compassion. Eventually Heracles, during his wanderings, came across Prometheus. He shot the eagle and freed the Titan. But Zeus's anger required some penalty, so Prometheus was made to wear a ring forged from his chains, with a piece of the Caucasus rock set into it, so that he would always be bound, even in freedom. But Zeus's punishment of humanity didn't end with taking away fire. For the second offence, receiving the stolen fire, Zeus created a new punishment: woman. This sounds horrifying to modern ears, and it should. The myth is deeply misogynistic, reflecting ancient Greek anxieties about gender and sexuality. But it's also one of the most important explanations for human suffering in Greek thought. Zeus ordered Hephaestus to create the first woman from clay. All the gods gave her gifts. Aphrodite gave her beauty. Athena taught her crafts. Hermes gave her cunning and deceit. Apollo gave her music. Demeter gave her agricultural knowledge. Each god contributed something, which is why she was called Pandora, all gifted. But Zeus had Hermes give her one additional gift, a sealed jar, mistranslated in later tradition as a box. She was told never to open it. Then Zeus sent Pandora to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name meant afterthought, or hindsight. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept gifts from Zeus, but Epimetheus, seeing Pandora's beauty, married her anyway. Pandora, curious about the jar Zeus had given her, eventually couldn't resist. She opened it. Out poured all the evils of the world: disease, death, pain, sorrow, greed, envy, hatred, war, everything that makes human life difficult and painful. These spirits flew out into the world and have plagued humanity ever since. Only one spirit remained in the jar when Pandora finally closed it. Elpis, hope. The meaning of hope remaining in the jar has been debated for centuries. Some say it means hope is preserved for humanity, that despite all evils we still have hope to sustain us. Others argue that hope is actually another evil, a false comfort that makes us endure suffering we should resist. Either way, the myth explains why human life is full of suffering, and why, despite everything, humans keep going. Zeus's relationship with humanity reached its nadir with the Great Flood, a myth that parallels flood stories from other ancient Near Eastern cultures, particularly the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. In the Greek version, Zeus looked down at humanity and saw that people had become wicked, impious, and violent. The Bronze Age of humans, according to Hesiod, was particularly bad, with constant warfare and disrespect for the gods. Zeus decided to wipe out humanity and start over. He called upon his brother Poseidon, and together they sent torrential rains and massive floods. The waters rose, covering everything. Mountains were submerged, cities drowned. The entire human race was destroyed, except for two people. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, had been warned by his father to build an ark, a large boat that could survive the flood. Deucalion and his wife Hera, daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora, built the ark, stocked it with provisions, and floated on the floodwaters for 9 days and 9 nights. Finally they came to rest on Mount Parnassus. When the waters receded, Deucalion and Hera emerged to find a world empty of humanity. They were the only survivors, and they didn't know how to repopulate the earth. They prayed to Zeus, asking for guidance. Or in some versions, they consulted the oracle at Delphi, which was sacred to Zeus's son Apollo. The answer came: "Throw the bones of your mother behind you." Deucalion and Hera were initially horrified. This seemed to be asking them to desecrate their mother's graves. But Deucalion, inheriting his father's intelligence, realized the oracle spoke in riddles. Their mother was Gaia, the earth, and her bones were stones. They picked up rocks and threw them over their shoulders. The stones Deucalion threw became men. The stones Hera threw became women. From these stone-born people, the new human race was descended, hardier perhaps than the previous generation, able to endure the hardships Zeus and the other gods would place on them. The flood story serves multiple purposes in Greek mythology. It explains why humans have to work so hard for survival, why life is full of difficulties. The stone-born humans are tougher, less refined than their predecessors, more like the hard earth from which they came. It also establishes that Zeus has the power and willingness to destroy humanity if they become too wicked, setting a limit on human behaviour. And it connects Prometheus's family to the new humanity, suggesting that even in punishment and destruction, there's a chain of continuity, a thread connecting the old world to the new. These myths of Prometheus, Pandora, and the flood show Zeus not as a benevolent father figure, but as a complex authority who demands respect, punishes transgression, and yet allows humanity to survive and even thrive. He gives gifts, through Prometheus's theft of fire, but also punishments, Pandora's jar. He destroys, the flood, but also preserves, saving Deucalion and Hera. He's powerful but not purely beneficent, just but not always merciful, a god who shaped the human condition in all its pain and possibility. Zeus's influence didn't end with the decline of ancient Greek religion. His identity evolved, was adopted by other cultures, and was reinterpreted by philosophers, creating layers of meaning that extended far beyond the original myths. When Rome absorbed Greek culture, they identified their own sky god Jupiter with Zeus. Jupiter, whose name derives from the same Indo-European root as Zeus, meaning sky father, had been a relatively undeveloped deity in early Roman religion. But as Rome came into contact with Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily, they began to associate Jupiter with Zeus, importing not just the name but the entire mythological system. Jupiter became Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter best and greatest, the principal deity of the Roman state. His temple on the Capitoline Hill in Rome was the religious and political centre of the city. Roman generals would climb the Capitoline to offer sacrifices to Jupiter before military campaigns. Triumphs, victory celebrations, ended at Jupiter's temple. The Roman Senate often met in buildings dedicated to Jupiter. But Jupiter wasn't exactly Zeus. Romans adapted the god to their own values. Jupiter was more formal, more associated with the state and civic duty, less involved in the personal and often scandalous affairs that characterise Zeus's Greek mythology. Romans were generally uncomfortable with the messier aspects of Greek myths, the adultery, the deceptions, the petty jealousies. They kept the basic framework, Zeus, Jupiter as king of gods, but emphasised different aspects: authority, law, the protection of Rome itself. The eagle, already sacred to Zeus, became the symbol of Roman legions. Jupiter was often invoked in military contexts as Jupiter Victor, Jupiter the Victorious, or Jupiter Stator, Jupiter who stays or who steadies. The Romans built temples to Jupiter across their empire from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Syria, spreading the sky god's worship wherever Roman power reached. Meanwhile, Greek philosophers were reinterpreting Zeus in more abstract terms. The Stoics, a philosophical school that flourished in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, saw Zeus as synonymous with divine reason, logos, the rational principle that governed the universe. In Stoic thought, Zeus wasn't really a bearded man on a mountain throwing thunderbolts. Zeus was God, the divine intelligence that structured reality, the force that ensured natural laws operated consistently. Cleanthes, a Stoic philosopher, wrote a hymn to Zeus that reinterpreted the god in terms that sound almost monotheistic. Most glorious of immortals, Zeus the many-named, lord of nature, governing all things with law, for we are your children. You guide the universal word through all things. Nothing occurs on earth apart from you, O God, nor in the divine heavenly firmament, nor in the sea, except what bad men do in their folly. This philosophical Zeus was far removed from the Zeus who turned into a swan to seduce Leda, or who chained his wife from the sky for opposing him. This was Zeus as cosmic principle, as divine order itself. For educated Greeks and Romans in the later ancient period, the myths were often seen as allegories, symbolic stories that conveyed deeper truths about the nature of reality, morality, and the divine. Neoplatonists, another philosophical school, placed Zeus in a complex hierarchy of divine beings. For them, Zeus represented the demiurge, the divine craftsman who shaped the material world according to eternal forms. He was below the ultimate one, the supreme principle of reality, but above the lesser gods and demons. This Zeus was a cosmic architect, a force of organization and structure. Not everyone bought into these philosophical reinterpretations. Some Christians, as Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, pointed to Zeus's myths as evidence of pagan foolishness. Look at your gods, they would say. Zeus who committed adultery, Zeus who punished mortals cruelly, Zeus who had to fight to maintain his throne. How is this worthy of worship? The scandalous stories that Greeks had used to humanize their gods, to make them relatable and interesting, became ammunition for religious critics. Yet Zeus's influence persisted in unexpected ways. When Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, some of Zeus's attributes were subtly transferred to the Christian god. The image of God the Father as a bearded authority figure, seated on a throne judging humanity, owes something to artistic depictions of Zeus, Jupiter. The eagle, Zeus's sacred bird, became a Christian symbol as well. thunder and lightning continued to be associated with divine judgment, just as they had been in Zeus's mythology. In Byzantine art, Christ Pantocrator, Christ the Almighty, was sometimes depicted in poses reminiscent of Zeus, seated in majesty, holding symbols of authority, surrounded by divine court. The transition from pagan to Christian wasn't a complete break, but a gradual transformation where some imagery and concepts persisted under new names and interpretations. Zeus's influence extends far beyond the ancient world. He appears in modern literature, art, film and popular culture, often adapted but always recognisable. His myths continue to resonate because they deal with timeless themes: power and its responsibilities, family dysfunction, the relationship between divine and human, the struggle to maintain order against chaos. In Renaissance art, Zeus, usually as Jupiter, was a common subject. Artists painted his various love affairs, his battles against the titans and giants, his apotheosis of heroes. The ceiling of the Palazzo del Te in Mantua, Italy, features a dramatic fall of the giants frescoed by Giulio Romano, showing Jupiter Zeus hurling thunderbolts at the rebellion, the perspective designed so viewers below feel like they're in the midst of the battle. The Baroque period loved Zeus's dramatic stories. Peter Paul Rubens painted numerous scenes of Zeus's affairs: Zeus and Danaë, Zeus and Europa, Leda, and the Swan. These weren't just mythological exercises. They were explorations of desire, power, transformation, and the intersection of divine and mortal worlds. In literature, Zeus has been reimagined countless times. In Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Rick Riordan's popular young adult series, Zeus is the somewhat bureaucratic and often absent father of the gods, ruling from the Empire State Building's 600th floor, which in the books is Mount Olympus's new location. He's powerful but fallible, authoritative but not particularly wise, and his children have to deal with his legacy while carving out their own identities. Marvel Comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe feature Zeus in their cosmic mythology, though he plays a relatively minor role compared to Thor and the Norse gods. In Marvel's interpretation, Zeus leads the Olympians from Olympus, an extra-dimensional realm, and occasionally interacts with Earth superheroes. Disney's Hercules, 1997, features Zeus as a benevolent, loving father, far removed from the complex, often cruel figure of actual Greek mythology. This Zeus is all heroic poses and booming laughter, a sanitized version designed for family entertainment. It shows how modern retellings often simplify Zeus, removing the problematic elements to create a more straightforward heroic or paternal figure. In more serious literary works, Zeus appears as a more ambiguous character. In Ted Hughes' Tales from Ovid, the poet laureate retranslates Roman myths, which draw heavily on Greek stories, with a modern sensibility, emphasizing the violence and violation in many of Zeus's transformations and affairs. Hughes doesn't let readers romanticize the god's behavior. He presents Zeus's power as frightening, his desire as dangerous, his transformations as fundamentally acts of deception that harm mortal women. Madeline Miller's Circe features Zeus as a distant, threatening authority figure, capable of terrible vengeance, embodying the danger that divine attention brings to mortals. The novel emphasizes how Zeus's whims shape destinies, how his children both benefit from and suffer because of their divine parentage, and how his justice can be arbitrary and cruel. Video games have embraced Zeus as a character. In the God of War series, Zeus is a central antagonist in the Greek saga, a father who betrayed his son Kratos and must face the consequences. This Zeus is paranoid, ruthless, driven by fear of the prophecy that he would be overthrown, becoming the tyrant his own father Kronos had been. The games use Zeus to explore cyclical violence, the corruption of power, and the impossibility of escaping one's fate. In Hades, a roguelike video game set in Greek mythology, Zeus is a boon-granting uncle to the protagonist Zagreus, powerful but somewhat airheaded, obsessed with his own glory, often missing the point but generally well-meaning. It's a more comedic take, emphasizing Zeus's vanity and his tendency to miss social cues while still presenting him as genuinely powerful and worthy of respect. Modern astronomy continues Zeus's legacy. Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, was named after the Roman equivalent of Zeus, and many of Jupiter's moons are named after Zeus's lovers, Europa, Io, Ganymede, Callisto. The Jovian system is essentially a map of Zeus's romantic entanglements, visible in the night sky. In psychology, Jungian analysts sometimes use Zeus as an archetype, the Sky Father, representing authority, rational thought, order, and the conscious mind. Zeus is the king archetype, embodying leadership, responsibility, judgment, but also the dangers of authoritarianism, the tendency to value power over compassion, order over emotional truth. Zeus appears in comparative mythology, where scholars examine similarities between Zeus and other Indo-European sky gods, the Norse Odin, the Hindu Indra, the Roman Jupiter, the Germanic Tyr. These comparisons reveal shared roots in Proto-Indo-European religion, suggesting that Zeus's myths preserve extremely ancient ideas about divinity, power, and the structure of reality. Even the language we use today carries Zeus's influence. Words like deity and divine come from the same root as Zeus, the Proto-Indo-European dew, meaning sky or shine. Meteorology, the study of weather and atmosphere, is the study of Zeus's domain. When we talk about titanic struggles, we're referencing the titan Zeus defeated. When we mention someone having an Achilles heel, we're referencing the hero of Zeus's bloodline. Zeus's myths continue to be relevant because they deal with issues that don't go away. Questions about authority and its limits, the tension between power and justice, the complications of family relationships when power is involved, the gap between what leaders claim to represent and how they actually behave, the consequences of divine attention for ordinary people, the problem of suffering in a world supposedly governed by divine justice. In many ways, Zeus is too complex, too flawed, too human to be the god of a modern monotheistic religion. But that complexity is precisely what makes him fascinating as a mythological figure. He's not perfectly good or wholly evil. He's powerful but limited. He makes mistakes, feels emotions, acts irrationally, yet also maintains cosmic order and embodies justice. He's an immortal being with very human characteristics, and perhaps that's the point. The Greeks didn't need their gods to be perfect moral exemplars. They needed gods that reflected the complicated reality of existence, where power can be used for good or ill, where authority figures are flawed, where even supreme beings have to make difficult choices and live with the consequences. So who was Zeus, king of the gods, sky father, thunder wielder, oath keeper, serial adulterer, punisher of hubris, father of heroes, defender of cosmic order, tyrant who overthrew his father, god who maintained justice, all of these, and more. Zeus's story is one of the most complete mythological narratives we have from the ancient world. From his hidden birth in a Cretan cave to his wars against titans and monsters, from his countless affairs to his rule from Mount Olympus, from his involvement in the Trojan War to his worship across the ancient Mediterranean, Zeus's mythology shaped Greek religion, culture, and thought for over 1,000 years. He represented something essential to the Greeks, the idea that power must be balanced with wisdom, that authority comes with responsibility, that even the most powerful being in the cosmos is subject to fate and must make difficult choices. He showed that rulers are flawed, that even divine justice can seem arbitrary, that maintaining order requires constant effort against forces of chaos. Zeus's affairs and his complicated family life reflected Greek anxieties about power, gender, consent, and family. His punishments of hubris reinforced Greek social values about knowing one's place and respecting the divine. His protection of guests and enforcement of oaths helped maintain social order in a world without strong centralized government. His oracles provided guidance in times of uncertainty. His festivals created shared religious experiences that united fractious Greek city-states. When we look at Zeus today, we see a figure who has transcended his original cultural context. He's been a Roman god, a philosophical principle, a Renaissance artistic subject, a literary character, a video game antagonist, a superhero universe background figure, and a symbol in psychology and comparative religion. Few mythological figures have had such longevity, such adaptability, such enduring relevance. The thunder still echoes. When storms roll across mountains, when lightning splits the sky, when we witness power being exercised, or when we see authority struggling to maintain order against chaos, we're witnessing themes that Zeus embodied for the ancient Greeks. His mythology remains alive not because modern people worship him, though some neo-pagans do revive aspects of Greek religious practice, but because his stories continue to resonate, continue to teach, continue to reveal truths about power, authority, family, fate, and the human condition. Zeus was never just a myth. He was a way of understanding the world, a framework for thinking about power and justice, a collection of stories that helped people make sense of thunder and lightning, suffering and joy, the randomness of fate and the structure of society. That framework, those stories, that understanding haven't disappeared. They've evolved, been reinterpreted, adapted to new contexts, but the core remains. Zeus, the king who ruled from the sky, whose thunderbolt could shake mountains, and whose decisions shaped the destiny of gods and mortals alike. The king of the gods may have left his throne on Mount Olympus millennia ago, but his legacy endures. Every time we tell stories about complicated fathers, flawed authority figures, the burden of power, or the struggle to maintain order, we're echoing the myths of Zeus, and in that sense the storm never really ended. It just took on new forms, speaking to new generations, carrying forward the oldest stories of the Western world into an uncertain future, where the questions Zeus's mythology raised remain as relevant as ever. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complete story of Zeus. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Greek mythology, leave a comment letting me know what aspect of Zeus's story fascinated you most, and what other mythological figures you'd like to explore. Until next time, sweet dreams, and may your sleep be as deep as Zeus's slumber before the final battle.